Tropical depression Fred's forecast quite literally up in the air at this hour as the system enters a blind spot to our south. Plus, moments ago, the system behind Fred upgraded to a potential tropical cyclone. All the latest plus a meteorologist Q&A coming up here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, folks. JB Biunno here with you live on your hurricane headquarters. A lot to get to here over the next 20 or so minutes here on Tracking the Tropics. Great to have KLFY meteorologist Chris Cozart joining us from Louisiana. We're going to be talking about Gulf Coast impacts coming up here in a little bit. If you've never been with us here before on Tracking the Tropics, it's very simple to ask a question here in the Facebook Live comment section. All you have to do is use one of the hashtags here on your screen. You see them underneath our names here, hashtag HJB, hashtag Hey Chris, or you can also use hashtag Hey Amanda for Tracking the Tropics. Meteorologist Amanda Holly standing by with the latest on Fred and now potential tropical cyclone 7 here in the Atlantic. Amanda.
A lot to get to on this Friday morning at 11 a.m. We did just get the latest in on Fred, and just moments ago they upgraded Invest 95L to a potential tropical cyclone. I will explain what that means here in just a second because it is not yet a named storm and it is not yet a tropical storm. So I'll explain what that means, but let's get to Depression Fred right now because that's of course it's getting a little bit closer to the United States. It's also getting a little bit closer to Cuba. I've been analyzing this satellite all morning long and just looking for trends. And I'll tell you what, the center of the storm, very hard to locate, number one. Number two, it looks like it's at least on the barrier islands of Cuba, if not over the main island itself. That's problematic for a couple reasons. One, the hurricane hunters that flew in there this morning, well, we're not allowed to fly over Cuba. So it's very hard for us to get ground readings with Fred if the center is too close to the coastline because we can't fly over it and get the direct reading. So we're kind of analyzing satellite here to get the latest. Maximum wind still at 35 miles per hour, pressure at 1,003 millibars, and it's moving generally west-northwest at about 12 miles per hour. We've seen a little bit of a south jog this morning. We've seen a little bit of a west jog. The overall motion looks like it's about west-northwest at 12 miles per hour. Looking at the visible satellite right now, right before we get to the track, because I just want to point out a couple things. The system, again, the center looks like it's over the main island right about here, right where those thunderstorms bubble up in the last couple of frames. That's over land, and there's not a whole lot of thunderstorm activity around it, with the exception of this batch out here, way out in the Atlantic, well far away from the center. And there's a lot of thunderstorm activity well to the south of the main island of Cuba, which can't make its way off to the north because of the islands blocking that tropical moisture feed. So this has been a very interesting situation to follow all morning long. Tons of meteorologists across the country really just analyzing the data, kind of having discussions back and forth on Twitter about what we're actually going to see happen, and what will we see happen remains a question mark. Is it going to survive this? Does it keep moving more to the west over the land and dissipate altogether? Not out of the question. A low chance still, and we are still thinking that it is going to re-emerge back into the Florida Straits, slowly try and regain that strength before it brushes by the west coast of Florida. If the current thinking still holds, I want to walk you through the timing here. We are still expecting by 8 p.m. tonight it to be a tropical depression. Now, I will say, last night, Fred kind of looked like it was getting its act organized just a little bit more, but until this morning when it kind of moved over Cuba. So it looks like it's going to stay a depression a little bit longer, possibly through 8 o'clock tonight, maybe even through the early morning hours on Saturday. Once it emerges over the Florida Straits, though, it's going to be able to pick up on some of that warmer water and potentially regain that tropical storm status by 8 a.m. tomorrow. Continue that through 8 p.m. tomorrow near the Florida Bay off of Florida's southwest coast and continue off on the northwesterly track. This track lies in a very similar location to what our previous tracks looks like. It's just a little bit smaller because we're getting a little bit more confidence and we're getting closer to the event, so we're not seeing as wide of a track, but it's generally still in the same location. And that means that the center will likely stay just offshore of Florida's west coast and then possibly possibly be making landfall somewhere in the Florida Panhandle late Sunday night, early Monday morning as a mid-grade tropical storm. One thing to note here is that most of the activity really is going to be on the eastern side of this storm. So even though Florida isn't in the cone, the peninsula of Florida isn't in the cone really anymore, we're still going to see impacts in the form of those tropical rain bands because all of that activity is going to be displaced on the eastern side. Then, of course, as it makes its way over land, it will continue to dissipate and it'll bring that tropical moisture north, possibly into the Nashville area, into the Tennessee River Valley. That's a look at your track. Nothing really surprising here. We really haven't seen the track shift or move in the past several days because the forecast models have been pretty much dead on since the beginning. Tropical alerts, they really haven't changed. We have the tropical storm warnings in effect for the Florida Keys, and the yellow here is the tropical storm watches. I do expect these to be lifted northward, so we'll start to see some of those watches be issued for the Tampa Bay area here locally today. Don't let that alarm you. That is just how it goes when a tropical system comes near us. We are expecting those tropical effects on Sunday, so as we get closer to the event, it'll become a watch, and then it'll be upgraded to a warning. Again, that's if Fred holds together. The forecast models all agree. Eventually, it's going to take that turn off to the northwest and then more so off to the north, kind of brush by our coastline, and then make landfall somewhere in the Florida Panhandle. And again, those impacts still being felt along the Gulf Coast because it is going to be kind of a lopsided storm. We're not going to be looking at a very symmetrical storm here moving forward as we get into the weekend. So I want to bring in Chris here to kind of talk about what your thoughts are with the latest thoughts on Fred and possible Gulf Coast impacts with this storm.
Well, it's a mess, right? With how disorganized it is. I'm a little concerned where the center of rotation is over Cuba and where National Hurricane Center is initiating those advisories or the forecast code and the tropical models. They seem to be a little off. Anytime you see that, you get a little concerned. It may not survive Cuba. If it's able to go further west, there's going to be a little opportunity for some strengthening. I think as what you pretty much said, it's going to be an easterly side heavy system, right? You're going to have all those showers and thunderstorms going up that Florida peninsula over the weekend and then landfall sometime Monday morning, early Monday morning, probably Destin or further east from there. But there is a little bit of window. There's a little wind shear that will lax down there on that Monday morning that could allow for it to be a modest to strong tropical storm. I don't want to downplay the weakness of that storm too much because I think it's a heavy rain event first, but it could turn into a wind event there at the very end.
Yeah, completely agree. And we can't rule out the fact that, you know, on the eastern side, we'll be watching for those isolated tornadoes as well. And that's going to include all of Florida's west coast, including east of where the center comes ashore here. Again, that's the side that we look for those possible isolated tornadoes. So that's the latest on Fred. Let's quickly get to potential tropical cyclone 7. I know it's a mouthful of a name. All it means is the National Hurricane Center starts calling it that so that they can issue advisories and a cone on it because they think it's going to develop into a tropical system, whether it's a tropical depression or a tropical storm, before it makes landfall. So they do think that it is going to become a storm before it makes an impact to the Lesser Antilles here. And that's why they call it the potential tropical cyclone 7. It's really just some weather terms. It's still just an area of low pressure that's trying to get organized. It's moving west at 21 miles per hour. It's got maximum winds of 35 miles per hour, similar to tropical depression Fred. So still trying to get its act together. It's also experiencing some shear there, and we do have a track on this particular, our weather graphics not showing it at the moment, but I'll tell you what, the track looks exactly like the path that Fred has recently taken, and by next Wednesday, this is where the current track has it sitting next Wednesday afternoon as a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm. So we're going to be talking about the tropics for quite some time. They are active right now, and I expect them to stay active as we head into August and really into September as well. Those are the forecast models for potential tropical cyclone 7. I do think that at this point, most of our longer range models recurve it before it gets to the state of Florida, but we're a long ways out, so things will change with that system. And of course, we're watching Fred right now because, guys, that's the near term.
A lot to unpack here with that 11 a.m. advisory that just came out from the National Hurricane Center. Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Amanda Holly will be sitting down with us here, everybody, for the Meteorologist Q&A. Let's activate now the Meteorologist Q&A here on Tracking the Tropics with KLFY's Chris Cozart there on the right side of your screen. You can use hashtag HeyChris, hashtag HeyAmanda, hashtag HeyJB. We'll get to your questions and comments if you use one of those hashtags here in the Facebook Live comment section. Really quick, want to explain. A lot of folks asking about this blind spot that we're talking about. The reason, Chris, that we have this blind spot to our south is because when the storm is over Cuba, we can't send in the hurricane hunters to fly through the storm to collect that precious data that we use to forecast these systems. So when it goes over Cuba, it is in a blind spot because we're unable to fly through it and collect the data that's necessary for us to find out where the system's going to head next.
Yeah, it's restricted airspace, right? So our boys can't fly in there. And that's crucial. That's going to be kind of a hour window or hours upon windows that we're not going to get some of that critical information, especially where that center of rotation is. That's crucial at this point because it is going over land. We're able still to use our visible satellite that you're seeing there. And without a lot of convection, a lot of the showers and thunderstorms, it's hard to see exactly where that center is. To me, it almost looks like the center is more over land than what the National Hurricane Center is. But right now, the fact that they can't fly in there and really pinpoint where the center is going to give us a little bit of a headache until this clears all of Cuba there.
Let's get to some of the questions that are coming in here. Michael Yule, hashtag Hey Chris. What's the likelihood of experiencing tropical force winds in central Florida? And, you know, this one's pretty interesting of a question just because this track now, Chris, really starting to shift away from Central Florida, away from the center, the heart of the Florida Peninsula here. So what do we say for Michael's comment?
Well, I think there's a chance it's not going to be extremely high, and it won't be a steady tropical storm strength wind that you would see, let's say, with a landfalling system across Central Florida there. But nonetheless, some of those outer bands are going to stretch across the majority of the peninsula of Florida, and within those kind of squally bands of rain, I think you could get upwards of 35, 45 mile per hour wind gust in there. And then, as Amanda was mentioning, you have the chance for some tropical tornadoes as well. We had this over at Harvey one time. Harvey was all the impacts was Houston, but it brought about 10 to 15 tornadoes into the Acadiana region. So even though the system is offshore, well enough offshore of Central Florida, you can still get some impacts, but the likelihood, I would put it more low to medium than anything else. And it would be in very certain bands that kind of work their way away from that center of rotation.
And before JB, you go on to the next question there, I just want to note, just in our regular summertime thunderstorm yesterday, we actually had a 61 mile per hour gust in St. Petersburg, Clearwater, somewhere in that region in Pinellas County. So that is in our normal summertime pattern. And just so you know, folks, that is technically a tropical storm force gust, because anything between 39 miles per hour and 74 is tropical storm. So we can experience tropical storm force winds in any of our summertime thunderstorms as well.
We actually had outflow boundaries a couple days ago that did the same thing. All the rain cooled air getting pushed ahead. We had about 40, 45 mile per hour wind gusts with that again. And that's a weak tropical storm right there.
Let's get to, well, you know what, let's address some of the comments that we have coming in here in the social media comment section, because there are likely a lot of folks that didn't see our previous editions of Tracking the Tropics over the course of the last 48 hours here. And we haven't really talked about this. Just focusing in here on Fred for a second, Amanda, this system just looks awful on satellite. This system has been disorganized really over the last 2 days, has been disorganized really since that cross over Hispaniola. There's a reason it's a tropical depression. When we look back at the 2021 hurricane season, it's very, very likely that there are going to be, you know, systems that were way stronger than what will likely reemerge as, you know, what will re-become Tropical Storm Fred here. So for all the folks out there that are saying, oh my God, this is nothing, this is just a bunch of rain, we're not disagreeing. We're just keeping a very, very mindful and cautious eye on what this could become here when it reemerges in the Gulf of Mexico, correct?
Absolutely. And keep in mind, folks, we are tracking the tropics. That's exactly what we're doing. There's something to track. There's actually two things to track in the tropics. So we're just on here giving you the latest just because it kind of looks crappy right now and we don't see a whole lot going on. The forecast as it stands does have it becoming a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico. And yes, we experience those winds on a daily basis. We're not saying that this is necessarily going to be the biggest wind threat to land, but it could be a flooding threat, because we're going to see quite a good rainfall accumulations in some localized spots, especially right along the coast as we go through the next couple of days. And as it nears our coastline here in Tampa Bay, we've actually gotten a lot of rain, especially right along the coast the past few days. So our grounds are saturated. We're likely looking at some of that localized flooding. And again, the isolated tornado threat, can't rule that one out. Not everyone's going to see a tornado here, but those folks that, you know, could potentially see one, that's why we're just putting this message out there. Hey, this is coming.
And it's in a hostile environment right now. We have Cuba. We have a tremendous amount of wind shear. A lot of people these days just want to say it's a bust right now. We're still 72 to 96 hours away from another landfall up across the panhandle of Florida. So don't turn your back on it just yet. This is the way social media is anymore. You know, we're so quick on everything. And right now it's in a very hostile environment, so we won't see the convection. We won't see that stereotypical, you know, eye wall at the moment, and it's going to have a lot of struggles going forward, but it is going to move into an environment that will allow for reorganization and strengthening once again before it possibly makes another landfall there in the panhandle of Florida.
Let's get to some of the questions that we have coming in here, folks. Again, you can use any of the 3 hashtags that we have here on your screen. Hashtag Hey Chris, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey Amanda. Amanda, of course, being our Florida meteorologist here, we'll throw this one her way. Liz Alexandra, hashtag Hey Chris, is the Kendall area of Florida going to get lots of flooding and rain? And if rain, when should we expect it? Kendall, Florida being, of course, a suburb of Miami.
Of the Miami area? Well, it depends on how organized Fred can get as it makes its way through the Florida Strait. So I'll kind of go back to visible satellite here, and then I'm going to zoom out just a little bit more, and we're going to look at infrared satellite. So right now, just by kind of analyzing the storm with you here, on the northern side of this system, the L, that's technically where the center of the storm is, about generally. On the northern side, we're just starting to see some of those thunderstorms re-pop up. And as this starts to track off to the northwest a little bit more, it's going to get closer to the Miami area, and all of this moisture is going to kind of pool with it. So rainfall, I think that you could potentially see several inches in some of those tropical bands that come through, especially as we get into late on Saturday, or throughout the day on Saturday for South Florida, and then late on Saturday for the Tampa Bay area. But yes, several inches of rain certainly possible in some of those bands that pool through the Miami area.
How about this one here from Michael Barr, hashtag Hey JB? Will the movement over the Gulf of Mexico have any influence on the strength of this storm? Is it possible? And what does the Euro, we always talk about the Euro model say? And a thank you here from Michael. We'll throw both you guys up here to take this one here from Michael Barr.
It really depends on how far west the actual center of rotation is able to travel. We already know it's going to be pretty much confined to the eastern Gulf of Mexico, but if we're able to get it a little further west, more into those open waters, and they're very warm, then there is a threat that it has a chance to strengthen. But I really don't see any type of like Category 3, Category 4. It just won't have enough time on that. So there is that chance of that happening, just a little bit more strengthening before making landfall there, if it is able to travel further west than what some of the tropical models are showing there.
Yeah, and the wind shear that's affecting it right now may or may not weaken as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico. So yeah, those waters are warm, but the wind shear ultimately I think is going to keep it on the weaker side as well. So that's going to hinder that development. Winds in the upper levels, about 3 miles off the surface, are going to stay coming in out of the west between 10 and 20 knots, and that's going to help to kind of tilt the structure of the storm if it can even get reorganized at all. But that's going to help to tilt the structure and not allow it to strengthen as quickly, keeping it slightly weaker than we would otherwise see this time of year.
Ray Ferrara, hashtag Hey Chris, hashtag Hey Amanda. Will the East Coast be affected by rain/wind all week, or is it really just going to be a weekend event, is what Ray is asking here?
It's a great question, Ray. This is not going to be a long-lived event. I've left the perfect timestamps up there on the screen for you. East coast of Florida, we're looking at those tropical rain bands, depending on if you're in South Florida. If you're in South Florida, south of the Orlando area, you're probably going to see mostly conditions deteriorating on Saturday, improving by the time you wake up on Sunday. And then if you're in North Florida, kind of opposite. It's going to be more of a Sunday event. So definitely not an all next week event, let alone an all weekend event.
How about this one here from, we're going to get to this question here. You know, we've talked about the track. The track has been, going a little bit west, a little bit east, it seems like, with the updates that we've been getting in over the last several days. But Danny here asking, hashtag, hey, Amanda, could this possibly shift to the east, back towards the Tampa Bay area and back towards the Florida Peninsula?
Another good question here. Yeah, we could still see little wobbles east and west here and there. I will say the discussion from the National Hurricane Center actually talked about this particular track lying too far east compared to where the latest model runs are. So we actually may see a shift farther to the west this afternoon. But we always talk about the windshield wiper effect. We see it to a little bit to the east, a little bit to the west. Those models are kind of ingesting new information every run, but we're going on it's Friday, so we started this Tuesday, day 4 now, and since Tuesday we really haven't seen a huge shift in any of the models. I mean, they have been in general in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico since Tuesday, so we've been doing a pretty good job with this one.
Yeah, the consistency on the tropical models, that's what you want to see, right? Yeah. When they're all clustered together, that's really what a meteorologist likes to see. I hate when they're all fanned out and everybody's wanting to know where's it going. Well, when they're that fanned out, you really don't have a general idea. But they've been very, very consistent. As you mentioned, they kind of swing it a little further west compared to where that forecast track is from the National Hurricane Center. But the global models, they've just not really had much on this system. And then, in fact, they almost keep it like hugging the west coast of Florida. If that's the case, it really would stay really weak in that case. There's the latest spaghetti models, and you can see how they swing a little bit further as they get closer to Tampa. They kind of make a little arc to the west and then right back into almost the Tallahassee area there for Monday morning.
It's interesting. I have the National Hurricane Center's app on my phone. Of course, I'm sure that you guys likely have it as well. And they just sent out a push alert here a moment ago talking about potential tropical cyclone number 7, saying that it is forecast to become a tropical storm. Next up on the alphabet would be G for Grace. So Grace would be the next named storm. So there's the chance, and I would say it's a pretty solid chance, Amanda, based on what we're seeing here in these models, that we could be monitoring 2 tropical storms come Saturday evening into Saturday night, with the potential formation or the potential upgrade of potential tropical cyclone number 7. How many times can I say the word potential? And then, of course, and then Fred becoming a tropical storm here yet again.
Yeah, Fred, obviously, we still expect to become a tropical storm within the next 24 to 48 hours. And then behind that, we talked about it a little bit ago. That's been the area that we've been watching out in the middle of the Atlantic. The National Hurricane Center now deeming it potential tropical cyclone 7 because they also expect that one to become a tropical storm in the next 48 hours before it impacts the Lesser Antilles. That's why it's being called that right now. It's not yet a named storm. It just allows them to issue that cone. And the spaghetti models, the forecast models, they take it in a very similar path to what Fred has taken so far.
How about this? Go ahead, Chris.
Just a real quick one to talk about that potential tropical cyclone. I know that's one thing. Talking about it a little bit, some confusion with that. A lot of people really don't understand. It's relatively new. They started that about, I would say, 3 or 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see there's where potential tropical cyclone 7 is. It's on the right side of your screen where the L is. So technically it's Invest 95L and then eventually now potential tropical cyclone 7. All that means is, hey, we can start issuing forecast codes like you're used to seeing. Technically, I think they get a little too into the book on what's a depression, what's a storm. It's a depression at this point, and then we're going to see probably a more than likely Grace form over the weekend. But don't get too caught up in the terminology when you hear potential tropical cyclone. That's a generic term to say, hey, we got something that's about to form here, and here's the forecast cone to give you a better heads up on where it's going.
It's honestly more for us meteorologists giving out the information, saying like, hey, they even have a higher chance of this developing over the next 48 hours, just giving us a heads up because, yeah, it's really just terminology.
Back to what Chris was just talking about 5 minutes ago. Crystal Rhoden here, hashtag Hey Amanda. I think it would reach up to a Cat 2 just because the Gulf waters are like 85, mid-80s, 85 or so degrees. Those warm Gulf waters here, fuel for a tropical depression or a tropical system that we monitor. But yeah, Chris, Amanda, this is what we're monitoring here as the potential future for this system.
Yeah, the Gulf waters are warm. There's no question about it. I didn't include that graphic in this episode of Tracking the Tropics, but we all know that they're plenty warm enough for that tropical development at this point. That's the main reason why we think that it is going to regain that tropical storm status. It's going to eventually tap into those warm waters and strengthen. But again, there are several factors still limiting, depending on how much land interaction it has with the peninsula of Florida and that wind shear that we keep talking about that's keeping it weak right now. That could continue as we head into the weekend, which would also help to keep it weaker.
And that wind shear looks like it probably will, for the most part, stay rather high until right there at the end of landfall. But again, by that time, hopefully it's interacting with land. But wind shear, so there's a lot going into how a storm forms, how it strengthens. And warm waters is a crucial part, but it's only one part. You know, when you're making cookies, you can't just make cookies with flour. You got to have sugar, you got to have the candy and all that. So unless all of that comes together, then you really don't see all that strengthening as quickly as we were last year. All those really strong storms that we saw last year was a product of light wind shear, light winds on the higher levels of the atmosphere, and those warm waters. So yes, it's warm, but again, we have other factors that will kind of counteract that and keep it from getting too strong.
Chris, before we wrap up here, you're joining us from Lafayette, Louisiana, of course, KLFY, and I'm sure that that your Louisiana viewers are quite relieved to see this track taking shape way to the east of Louisiana. What are you going to be monitoring in the hours and days ahead here with these systems that we're keeping an eye on here on Tracking the Tropics, and what do you have to say for your folks, your viewers there in Louisiana and on the northern Gulf Coast?
Yeah, just watching Fred, just making sure that everything cooperates and behaves once it clears Cuba here. I'll breathe a little bit easier. I'm already breathing pretty easy. None of the models have anything too crazy going west into us here in Louisiana. Grace just has our attention, as it will always every year this far out in the Atlantic. There's a lot of uncertainty where it's headed, how strong it will be right now. Path looks like it's very similar to Fred, as Amanda was talking about. So at this point, Florida would be the one to kind of just really keep a close eye on it. Louisiana, we had our fair share, of storms last year, 5 landfalls, 3 major hurricanes, and here at our viewing area, we had Hurricane Laura and Delta. Those were the 2 major ones that really gave us impacts here. But right now, things have been at least cooperating on our end, and we've been very lucky with the last 2 systems. Elsa stayed there on the east side of the Gulf of Mexico, and it looks like Fred will as well. So we're still looking pretty good over the next 1 to 2 weeks at this point.
KLFY's Chris Cozart joining us from Louisiana, folks. As we do, we bring in meteorologists from across the country here to bring their expertise, their experience here to us here as we take a look at the latest systems that we have forming in the Atlantic hurricane season. To all the questions that we had, thanks to all of our commenters using all of our hashtags. As a reminder, one more time here, Fred, not really impressive on satellite right now. Not really anything to worry about here at this particular point in time. We are monitoring Fred and now monitoring what could become Grace here for what they could become in the days ahead, or really, in Grace's case, the week or so ahead. So we'll be monitoring both of these very, very closely to keep you educated, informed, and aware as to the very latest coming in from the National Hurricane Center, provided, of course, the expertise that we have from all the meteorologists that join us here on Tracking the Tropics. Great to have, again, KLFY's Chris Cozart and, of course, WFLA's Amanda Holly. I'm JB Biunno. We'll see you for the next edition here, folks, of Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.